yeah, I got really deep into drugs and alcohol, and my life sort of veered off track for a number of years, like through the rest of my teenage years. And I dropped out of high school. Friends are like, "Why do you wake up so early, man? Like, you really need to meditate that much?" I'm like, dude, yes, because if I don't do that before I interact with anyone, most likely I will ruin someone's day. And that will probably be mine, unfortunately.
Welcome to Successful with ADHD. I'm Brooke Schnittman. Let's get started. Hello, and welcome back to another episode of Successful with ADHD. Today I have Christopher French here, and he is a composer, and he's a lot more. But in true ADHD fashion, I wasn't given a bio ahead of time, so he's going to have to do himself justice. Christopher, who are
Oof.
you?
Good morning, everyone. I am Christopher French. I am a composer and an artist. I'm also a dad now of one and about to be of two, a husband and a major scatterbrain, I guess.
Okay, there you go. There you go. So Christopher is one of us. He is an ADHDer. I, from the outside looking in, would consider him successful, Full, but I'll have him share his story with all of you. Christopher, when did you learn you had ADHD?
Actually, it's funny because I really only started remembering some of this stuff recently, and especially with following you on Instagram and a couple of others. There's a lot of awesome content right now about ADHD that's kind of surfacing more in our society. But when I was a kid, I was a 90s kid. I
Me too.
was, yeah, I was born in 1982. So around middle school, like seventh, eighth grade, I had been struggling for some time in school and with friends and at home, and was just kind of like starting to get, I sort of picture it like, starting to get more and more sort of loose and tangled, kind of. Just in general
Yeah.
in my life, it was weird. It was like the seams were sort of loosening, and my parents were like, "Wait, what's going on? Let's keep it together here." And we went to a therapist. Oh no, actually, I was in a class. I remember my teacher. I think it had to have been seventh or eighth grade, because this one teacher, he kept me after school, and my mom walks in, and I was like, "Oh, what's going on here?" And it was just like, a good little while after I was starting to get like disciplinary action in class and stuff, and a lot of like, "Oh, he is doing okay, but he talks way too much in class. I'm always having to separate him from his friends. He never turns in his homework. Like, what's going on here?" We sat down, and he told my mom, I think he has ADD, because I'm a 90s kid and ADD
Mm-hmm.
was the diagnosis, which for me made a lot more sense anyway, because I'm not at all a hyperactive person. I'm like, you know, oh, look at that flower. And then I like wander off for a while. And it's just not at all the same kind of physical hyperactivity that I was, and still until recently was under the impression that ADHD would be classified with. But so that was what he had told us. And he was like, "Look, it's not a big deal. And it's a sort of a new thing that a lot of doctors are looking at. But I think that you could benefit from talking to a doctor about it and potentially seeking some solutions in that context or whatever." We went to see a doctor. We never really got that much information about it. We were just kind of given this label and some
Mm-hmm.
Ritalin.
Mm.
And we were like, "Okay, let's try this." And so for a little while, I was doing Ritalin. And then after a while, that stopped working because, as characteristic as it gets, I would forget to take my Ritalin, or I'd misplace it, and then it's gone. And I'm like, wait, or I would forget if I had taken it. And
Mm-hmm.
so instead of doubling up a dose, it's like, I don't know if I've taken it. I'm just, so we switched to
Uh-huh.
dexedrine or whatever, which is a longer acting one. which sort of worked for a while, but it just made me feel weird. I just remember being like, this doesn't feel right. Like, I don't know, something's not working here. And nobody would like really listen or pay attention. And my parents didn't really know anything about it or what to do or anything. And so it just kind of slipped away. Like the diagnosis sort of slipped away, the medication slipped away, and especially I kind of really slipped away and I started getting more and more into self-medicating with drugs. And I don't know if I was, self-medicating ADHD. I wouldn't necessarily go as far as to specifically say that. I was probably self-medicating a lot of different things that I was going through at the time. But yeah, I got really deep into drugs and alcohol, and my life sort of veered off track for a number of years, like through the rest of my teenage years. And I dropped out of high school. My mom tried to homeschool me for a while, like, please, like, let's just try to figure this out. Let's figure out a way to, and I was just like, mm-mm.
Thinking that was the answer.
Yeah, or something. She was just like trying to keep, because I kept getting arrested for truancy because I was just like, I was a gutter punk kid. I'm from Santa Cruz area, and cops would pick us up and we'd get another truancy ticket, and my parents would have to pay another fine. And so my mom was like, okay, you're doing homeschool. If someone asks, you're in homeschool. So, whatever.
So, question for you, and I definitely want to hear more about this. And I appreciate the lack of understanding of ADHD that existed when you and I were born. I was born in 84, you were born in 82, and the change in names, and also the kind of the slipping away of your medication that you mentioned and everything slipping away.
Mm-hmm.
The statistics of ADHD and drug abuse and alcoholism are so high for
Really?
many reasons. Yes. But when you're taking the ADHD medication that can help with the reuptake of dopamine and norepinephrine, and when you're not taking the medication, not like it's an all or nothing type of thing, but we have a harder time with that. And it could lead to that type of behavior because you're not getting that constant drip.
Totally. Yeah. I mean, I was like chasing the high of, graffiti and like criminal activity and running around with friends doing crazy stuff because it was thrilling and whatever. So I'll bet there was probably some, kind of like dopamine compensation even in that.
Right. When you were understimulated, when
For
your
sure.
dopamine baseline was low, you were seeking that high, like you
Yeah.
mentioned, whether it be the truancy, the graffitiing, the drugs, the alcohol, and other things that you might have not mentioned.
Yeah. I may have not mentioned. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I mean, that's the crazy thing is, and none, my folks didn't really know anything about this. They were just trying to not, lose their kid to the streets, basically. I was like a full-on 90s gutter punk kid at the time, and they were just like trying to figure out what to do about it. And flash forward, I got into music really young, and so I've been playing music almost all my life, and um, kind of started leaving home and doing different things in bands and stuff. And in my early 20s, this is like flash way forward. So, I had kind of really totally slipped away. I mean, when I say slipped away, like I didn't really even remember, like I said earlier, this whole diagnosis and everything until really recently, like within the last 2 years, maybe. So up until my
And you're
mid
42.
20s,
So you're
and I'm
talking
42
about
now. Yeah.
20
So
years later.
yeah, 20 years later. And a lot of that is largely because of misinformation and misunderstanding. Because at some point, the diagnosis label changed to diagnostic label changed too. So it's just ADHD. And all you ever hear about ADHD, especially when we were kids, is like, oh, that annoying hyperactive kid that won't stop talking, or, my drummer best friends who just couldn't stop tapping on everything around them. Like, that was the thing. And I'm the opposite. I'm like a dreamer kid who's like
spaced
maybe,
out
yeah,
and
fully.
visions and
Yeah,
is in another reality
yeah,
sometimes.
yeah. And so I had just kind of, I don't know about blocked it out, but just definitely lost track of that having anything to do with my life. But it got harder and harder to manage. And especially with the drugs and alcohol, like it was just totally unmanageable. And I ended up, fortunately, at least getting sober in my early mid 20s. I've been sober ever since. But getting sober was one of the first steps for me in like, okay, I need to figure something out here. I need to find some way of getting it together. And what's crazy is a lot of recovery programs have, they've been around for like almost 100 years now, but even these kinds of old programs and systems are sort of built for people like me or like us in many ways, where they're like, you can't figure out what to do. You cannot figure out how to manage your life. Here's a structure, like extremely simple, like as stupidly simple as we can possibly make this for ourselves, to
Hmm.
like at least clean up the mess and
Hmm.
start to find a way to like reintegrate into society and perhaps become like a functioning member of human civilization. And so for me, that
I
was
get it.
huge and that was helpful. And for almost 18 years now, 17 and a half years now, that's been what has enabled me to do anything that I've done in my life. I mean, in music and being in different bands and stuff is already so crazy and chaotic and confusing and whatever. To be able to make it through that, start to build some like real functional relationships, leading to even getting married, you know, like start to build an actual career. I've been working as a composer for like a little bit over 10 years now, specifically as a composer for film and TV stuff, and building that kind of a career that has any kind of like sustainability and predictability has, I've needed all the support that I can get for that. But even with any of the growth that I've made and introspection and internal work that I've done, I still, even as of the last few years, especially with having kids, and one of the things that you had said at one point that really was one of the first things that stuck out to me, and someone else, I read it somewhere else as well, that for a lot of people with ADHD and people on the spectrum, the like process or act of having kids or getting married, like big life changes like that, where it takes a lot of your effort and bandwidth and whatever, can be what like triggers, or in my case, I think really re-triggers a lot of the ADHD issues that I've been sort of trying to like manually hold together over
Yes.
time to just fall apart because I'm like, I have no energy or space left
Sleep.
in my brain at the end of the day to like figure out what I'm going to do tomorrow. Like it's just everything over the last few
It's
years.
not
I've been like,
structured anymore.
yeah, over the last few years, I've been really like, what am I doing? And then as I've been seeing some of this stuff, like, oh my God, almost every one of the challenges that I face on a regular basis are specifically described as very clear ADHD characteristics. And I'm just like, oh my God, man, I've been living with this thing. I've been like kind of living with this like trailing behind me, kind of like on a little
Yeah.
rope, or I've been like carrying it like a suitcase, and have recently been like, okay, let me just open this suitcase up and look at it. And I have not gotten to the point even yet of honestly even really having time to, and getting back to a doctor to like get any kind of re-diagnosis. At this point, it seems so obvious to me, especially with my early diagnosis as a kid, that I don't even feel really the need to have
Well, why do you
a
feel that you would
diagnosis.
need a re-diagnosis? If you're diagnosed with ADHD, you're
Only
diagnosed with ADHD.
right. Only because I wonder, for me, medication is a little tricky just as a drug addict. Like it can be a little bit tricky, but I have a lot of friends that use ADHD medication and seem to really benefit from it. And
Hmm.
so I wonder, like, man, I got a second kid on the way. I'm like trying to hold my career together right now with all the crazy stuff going on in the film industry. And it's been like a struggle in and of itself. And I'm like, maybe having some kind of, you know, medical support for at least one of these really kind of confusing challenges might help. And I feel like I would probably need to see a doctor for that too. But
Yes.
that's where I'm at now. That's basically my whole story. I mean, the way that it was before,
It's the cycle of ADHD. Yep.
yeah, like you said, the way that it was for me before being diagnosed as a kid
Hmm.
is actually weirdly similar to the way it has been feeling recently, where it's just like
Hmm.
I don't know what's wrong with me. There were a couple times in the last couple of years, like right after we had a baby, my wife and I were going to go on a trip. It was like our first trip
Hmm.
solo to relax and
Hmm.
be baby free for a few days. And we're like, oh, getting so ready for this trip. She's like, you know, she seems to be pretty neurotypical to me, so she doesn't really like think about some of this stuff. She had figured she knew
Hmm.
where her passport was. I think you know what I'm getting to. I
Hmm.
start packing the day before because that's me. That's
Hmm.
my flow.
Hmm. You
You
need the
know,
urgency. Yeah.
I need
Uh-huh.
it's like and there's like a sense of pride weirdly that I've built
You
over
did it.
time. Yeah, where I'm like, oh, I don't need to pack more than an hour before we leave because I can do that or something. I'll, as if that's
Or
something to be
something.
proud of, you know? So I'm packing the morning of or the night before we're leaving, and I realize I don't know where my passport is. And I'm searching the house straight through the night. I literally didn't sleep because I searched every inch of our house and never found still have never found we've moved since then. And even in the moving process, I never found my passport. I have no idea
So,
where
needless to
this
say,
thing
you
went.
didn't go on the trip.
We did not go on the trip. It was like the most brutal. And she was like, this was a big deal, this trip. And to her, it was like, I just didn't care. And I just didn't really recognize how important it was to her. It wasn't as
You
important
felt. Yeah.
to me.
However,
Right.
I want to challenge you for a second because the people listening are probably more like you than her. And there's so much to uncover with what you said. But in this specific situation, it wasn't because you didn't care.
Exactly. No, of course not. But that was the thing. The next day, I like dropped into this 10, 11-year-old Chris narrative that was so loud. It's like was shocking to me how real and precise it was. There was like, what is wrong with you? Like seriously, how could you possibly not know where you're a grown adult with a child? You don't know where your passport is? Like, what if this was, you just fill in the rest of the narrative, I mean, it's like so almost
Yeah.
cliche, how kind of ubiquitous it probably is for folks like us. And for me, it was just like, I mean, I've played that narrative so many different times with different words. It doesn't even like have any meaning to me anymore. And it was similar when I got sober. I walked into a place that, a recovery place, and I still didn't know what was going on. Really, I was like, I feel like there's something wrong with me. But I met a bunch of people who were just like me and had the same, it was like word for word, same problems that I had. I realized that with drug addiction and alcoholism, like there's actually nothing wrong with me. As a drug addict and alcoholic, like I am functioning with complete normalcy, actually. That's the weirdest thing is that it's actually like totally on par with my coding to be doing what I'm doing, living the way that I'm living. And it was the most profound sense of relief. And I could like take a breath, I could exhale and be like, you know, there isn't anything wrong with me, and I can get help just like these people did, and, find ways to compensate for the aspects of me that maybe aren't so easy to live with or conducive to the kind of society we've built. But I'm going to be okay, and I don't have to beat myself up for or feel like condemned.
Yeah.
uh, you know and it was the same thing. Like, I started to realize with ADHD, like, there's nothing wrong with me. I have a friend who recently was being diagnosed and had finally kind of confronted his own issues, who had never been diagnosed before, didn't know anything about it, was talking to me about this stuff, and I was like, man, this is exactly what I struggle with. And there,
Mm-hmm.
in a way, there isn't anything wrong with me. Like, to lose my passport is pretty much like one of the easiest to deal with and silly, like, you know characteristic things of someone with a what is it you say,
ADHD,
with an executive functioning
dysfunction,
dysregulation or whatever. Yeah.
and
So
executive dysfunction syndrome, essentially.
yeah, I mean, we've worked that stuff out. My wife is basically the passport holder now. um that's
Hey, listen, neurotypical or not, we all have different roles in a relationship. And if you're okay with that and it works for both of you, that's
yeah.
wonderful, right?
Well, because that's one of those things where I was like, okay, well, there's nothing wrong with it. And maybe it would just be easier for me not to have to, like, I don't really want to have to, like, know where my passport is. Who cares? Because that's how I feel. Like, I don't get any,
It doesn't matter to you.
it doesn't matter to me. I don't get any, dopamine satisfaction from knowing where my password is. Like, it's, who cares? You know, it
Right,
doesn't
right,
matter. I
right.
what One of the things that's really easy and great for me is, like, when everything's up in the air, we've got a kid screaming in the middle of the night, and my wife is like desperate to sleep, and I'm like, I'm up and I can deal with stuff. Or when things are in disarray, I'm like
I got
in my
this. I got
element,
this.
you know,
Yeah,
because I
yeah.
it's like I have that kind of punk rock, like, type of dysregulation, I guess, and I've also, in those 20 years, especially in the, 17 years, 15 maybe, after a couple first years of getting sober, like, had to build a lot of, like, unique little structures into my life, systems into my life that enable me to, work with whatever challenges I bring to situations, and that are already challenging. Like,
Mm-hmm.
these days, for the last, like, 5 years or so, like, or maybe 8 years or so, I have a really consistent meditation practice.
Mm-hmm.
I've been kind of, like, accumulating lots of little tricks and hacks, and,
You have your guardrails.
yeah, tips on ways to, like, kind of deal with life on life's terms, so I can show
Mm-hmm.
up and, like, be at whatever my full capacity is for that day. These days
Mm-hmm.
I wake up early, like, because I need time alone to, like,
Mm-hmm.
set my brain in a way in the mornings, so that I am not, like, overstimulated all day long. So
Yep.
I'll wake up before the baby even wakes up, early in the morning now. And I used to be, like, night owl guy. I'd be in the studio working till 2, 3 in the morning, and then sleep till 10 a.m. But now I'm, like, up at 5:30 every day to meditate and drink my coffee with the sunrise and read a little bit. And then bam, the chaos shows up, and I'm, like, ready to go,
You're ready for it. It's so funny because I interviewed Dr. Bruce, who's the sleep doctor, and, there's the night owl, there's the dolphin, there's all these things, but he said that you can change over time,
Totally.
right? And
Yeah.
clearly you've done that. And I love that you've made it work with your wife and you made it work for yourself. because you're regulating your system and you're not waking up to chaos. You've
Right.
come back to something that works for you to get you regulated, open up your executive functions, maximize them, and be ready to take on the world. Because if you woke up in chaos, then your executive
It's
functions are not
over.
going to work properly
It's
and your
already
whole day
over.
is chaos. It's
Yeah.
already over
Yeah.
before it started.
Yeah, for sure. And it's what's crazy is that, I've gotten to a place over time where I'm so grateful for the challenges that I've been through since I was that kid, because it's proven to me through direct experience that change is possible, that it's not like, because there are so many times where, especially when I was younger, like this is it for me. But through seeing others change and putting a little bit of time and effort, because one of the things that really is crazy, and when I hear you and others talk about ADHD, like satisfaction, like the chemicals that we perceive as satisfaction that most people get from things like working out or
Rewards. Yeah.
rewards. Yeah, that's what it is.
Yeah.
Um, I've gotten directly from putting in just a little bit of effort into changing certain things. I'll get like, oh, it's a little bit easier to wake up earlier now. And then just like whoosh, this rush of like, oh, it feels great. Like I changed this. That's amazing.
Sure. And so you're taking the strategies that you have learned, it sounds, in your time in rehab, and you're
Yeah,
using them in your marriage, in your daily functioning,
yeah,
shifting, like when things get chaotic, to take a step back and thinking about the bigger picture of how can I go back to what I know works.
for sure.
So it's not always chaotic.
Yeah. And recognizing that things may just be chaotic, whether I like it or not, and having ways to deal with that when it happens. And one of the craziest things is how much the recovery industry has shifted to fully embracing its dual diagnosis, it's called, in recovery, where people have ADHD or have spectrum autism and are also struggling with recovery. We're struggling with, drug addiction and alcoholism, because it's probably because it is, like you said, so ubiquitous. Because there are lots of little things that we can do to, like you said, guardrails. It's like having guardrail. It's like walking around, finding little ways of building like a bumper on my car,
Yes.
so that I know I'm gonna bump into shit. So I might as well put a bumper on my car so I don't do as much damage. I always say, everybody's friends are like, why do you wake up so early, man? Like, you really need to meditate that much? I'm like, dude, yes, because if I don't do that before I interact with anyone, most likely I will ruin someone's day. And that will probably be mine, unfortunately.
I'm glad you ended with that.
So, because it's like, there's a few weird little things that I've found too recently that are like, I looked into this blue mind. Have you heard of
Okay.
this blue mind? There's a book called Blue Mind that this
Is
neuroscientist
it, we're
wrote.
talking about like water
Yeah.
and, yeah.
Yeah, like the neurological
Yes.
effects
Running
that,
water.
yeah, that water, and what this guy's science at least is showing is that all the way down even to the color blue. Like if you just are in an overstimulated, overreactive place and surround yourself with the color blue, or even think about the ocean, it automatically has like a very calming
Calming
and
effect.
relaxing effect on our cells, even like on the most basic level. So I started getting blue tinted sunglasses. So
Okay.
that when I know if we're going to the airport or I'm going to like a kid's birthday party or something, and it's like it's gonna be a lot, I put my blue shades on, and it's the entire world is like turned down maybe 2 or 3 notches. It's crazy.
Wow.
Yeah. Suddenly I'm like,
Wow.
oh, okay, I'm like relaxed at the airport. That's great.
Who's relaxed at the airport?
I know,
Unless you're
it's
in
crazy.
like first class and you're in the lounge and,
Yeah,
just chilling on your massage chair.
yeah.
Um, Wow. So a lot of people for overstimulation will use like loop earplugs or,
For sure, which I
sensory
do as
things, but
well. I did that when we had a kid. I got That's what I'm using here is these Bluetooth earbuds because I'll put like some white noise in my earbuds because the kid with the screaming, and it's that kind of stuff where it's just like I'm always so triggered by like sound, like intense sound, and especially chaotic sound, like because I'm really great with organized sound as a musician. Like that's how my brain works. I'll organize any sound I hear. Like if I'm at a stoplight and the blinker's going, like there's a beat playing in my head that's in sync with the blinker. Like organized sound is where my brain lives. But when there's disorganized sound, two people talking at once, or like, the dogs are barking and someone's trying to tell me something they think is important and the phone is ringing, I'm like, I'm looking at you, but I'm completely not here at all. Like my
yeah.
brain has melted and I've gone
Yeah.
away.
Right. You've heard every single sound on a different
Yeah.
frequency. And
Yeah.
exactly, you're just shaking your head, nodding, but listening to a million different sounds at once.
I'm
And it's
just trying
way
not to like
overstimulated.
scream at everyone and go hide, basically.
Yes.
So,
Yes.
so the
Yes.
earbuds work for sure. And the visual thing was a different kind of hack that I found recently with those with the blue
That's
shades. Yeah.
amazing.
Highly recommend anyone out there trying it because it's like I was like, oh, I'm gonna try this because it will look cool. If nothing else, it'll look cool. But
Yeah.
I was shocked like how much of a real impact it had on my mood.
Wow. So I definitely want to look more into that as well. But just side note with sunglasses, right? So some of the medications that we might be on for antidepressant or anxiety can make you more sensitive to the sun.
Hmm.
So wearing the sunglasses can also help
Whoa,
with that sensory overload
for sure.
and
I'll
the
bet.
sensitivity to sun. So now you added that extra layer of
Wow,
the blue, and I would love to look into that more to see the
that's really
scientific
cool.
effects of that. That's really cool. Yeah.
Wow.
So, Christopher, it sounds like you're managing the ups and downs of your ADHD similar to the ups and downs of your marriage. Like we know with adulthood, there's different things put on us. We have to pay taxes, we have to deal with interdependence. It's not
Mm,
independence, it's interdependence. We have to deal with kids. Like no one prepares us for this. And when you were a teenager and you dealt with the ADHD and you got sober, that was just a vacuum of your life then, right?
yeah,
But because you have that way and that awareness of how your ADHD operates, it sounds like from when you deal with new challenges, it might be scary at first, but you regulate yourself and you figure out ways to work through it, even with your new challenges.
yeah. I mean, that's the goal. That's like what I've been, what I kind of try to do more and more over time has been like, okay,
Okay.
that's what we can do. And as we do that, I get more feedback from it working that I can do that again, you know, because most of
Yeah.
the time I'm in self-doubt, like almost all the
Yeah.
time.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I'm like, oh God, I'm never going to be able to do this. But then I can remember that actually I've done this before, or I've done something similar, or I've done other things that were similarly daunting. And I can do that too. And a lot of the time, what's funny is that so much of the like systems and structures are just the same kind of patterns over different things. Like just apply that same pattern with different. Yeah, that's been the challenge for sure. That's like the life koan, the life challenge, right? Is like continuing to show up and stand up
It's like
straight. Yeah, and
the stock market.
yeah, yeah. It's tough though, but one of the things that I would say that I've been learning most recently is as I embrace or accept myself and my brain, more and more. I like, oh, I forget her name, but she has a book called How to ADHD,
Jessica McCabe.
I think. Yeah, yeah, yeah. I like how she talks about brains, where she's like, we're all just like brains with bodies. When I can look at my brain as a different or unique, but equally lovable aspect of whatever it is that I am, and like be ready to support myself and open to any external supports that there might be for me, and start from a place of a little bit more regulation and a little bit more self-love and a little bit more of that spacious, compassionate energy,
Mm-hmm.
no matter what it is that pops up. Like, at least I can step into a situation and be like, look, you guys, I have no idea what to do here. And that's okay. You know what I mean? It's okay. Like, most of the time, everybody's thinking that same thing. They're just not,
Not saying it.
they're just not able to say it.
You're asking for help by saying that, like you're not letting your ego step in the way and try to mask that you
Right.
don't know what's happening.
Right.
You're asking for
Yeah.
clarity.
Which is how I lived my life for the whole first half of my life. It was like, nobody's going to help you. So you need to just figure this out and try not to look like you don't know what to do. I mean, straight up, even because I went to school for recording and film scoring and orchestration, one of the things they literally taught us was when someone asks you to do something, just say, okay, good, I got this. And then don't tell them that you don't know what they're talking about. Go look it up and figure it out, which in some ways I get the practical use of that advice is, but in an interpersonal way, like if we use that, I mean, we're sort of taught that in a lot of ways by our society. And it's like we internalize that as, at least I internalized that as, even if I ask for help, nobody's going to help me.
No one's going to give it to you. Well, we
Yeah.
received 20,000 more negative messages by the age of 10 than neurotypicals. So it would make sense
Whoa.
that, right? It would make
Whoa.
sense that you would feel like you're alone, like you can't trust other people. Like if you ask for help, you won't get it back or they'll look down on you. So it's so
Wow.
validating now that you've matured and, we're practically the same age that like we can look back and say, okay, I can do this. You got the help that you needed. There's patterns that you can look at and say, where does this, like, how can I make sense of what's happening right now? And where are my bumpers or guardrails to bring me
Mm.
back?
Yeah.
And how do I manage with this organized chaos and replenish my energy so I can continue to thrive? So it's that metacognition, the reflection, the starting and activating and looking at the bigger picture.
Yeah. The bigger picture thing has been a huge thing, especially once I started like a real meditation practice. That bigger picture has changed almost everything in my life, like my ability to deal with almost everything, because so much of the time I get really easily, quickly locked into like, this is a problem. I got to fix this problem, or it's going to run my life forever. Or like, I get locked into like each little detail. But when I can step back and be like, okay, so basically everything's okay other than this or that, which I need to address. And then
At some point.
at some point,
Doesn't
yeah,
have
maybe not
doesn't have to
even
be
right now.
now.
Yeah,
Yeah.
probably shouldn't even be right now.
Right. Because my intention is to do this right now, this other
Right.
thing. And this is
Yeah.
not an emergency. Yeah.
Yeah. And recognizing for myself that so much of the time, if I keep my hands off and I stay open, most things will work themselves out. That's kind of one of the craziest lessons I've learned.
That's so hard to process, right? Especially when, because I'm talking about myself here for a second. I remember in my 20s when I had to show off, right? I was a special education teacher, tapped on the shoulder to be an administrator in special education. So I was constantly having to prove myself, right? I had to be the first to respond to emails. I had to be the first to do this just to show that I'm capable and a hard worker at that time.
Mm.
And I remember my boss saying to me, Brooke, give it a few minutes. And he had ADHD too.
Hmm.
but he was more mature and dealt with it. And he was also a child psychologist, right? So
Nice.
he had the
Yeah.
tools, but he's like, just give it a little while. You don't have to respond immediately. And generally, someone else will step in. You don't always have to be the first one to try to solve the problem.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah. That's like a quote that I was just thinking about the other day. That's again, like kind of from a Zen Buddhist perspective. That's like, you don't have to react to everything you notice.
Yes.
I was like, oh man, that's mind blowing. Because yeah, to me, it's like if I notice it, that means it's important enough that it needs my criticism, right?
Right. And my
Like,
immediate attention, let's
my
drop everything
immediate
else and be
attention. Yeah,
firefighters right
yeah,
now.
exactly. Yeah. And what's the craziest thing is once I've been able to accept how some of these things are for me, like I am this way, whatever way that is each day. Like interpersonally, like you were saying with my wife, for example, like over time, she stopped complaining about the fact that I just put stuff in random places when I walk in the door. I'm just like, oh, here's just like my keys and this or that or whatever. And she now goes, here's your drawer. I'm like, oh, great. I have a drawer now. And I'll put all my stuff in there, when I walk, just random stuff. And that's okay because it's my drawer and it can be messy if I want,
Yeah.
those kinds of things. And that was years ago before I started really looking into some of this stuff and seeing what everybody on social media talks about, like
The drunk junk
yeah,
baskets,
it's
drunk
amazing.
drawers. Yes.
It's amazing because I'm like, oh, that has seriously helped me.
Game changer. I have a neurodivergent family. I have two stepsons, 11 and 13, and they have ADHD, complex ADHD. My husband has ADHD.
Wow.
I have ADHD, right? So you can
Wow.
imagine and we have a 2.5-year-old toddler girl. So you can imagine what the chaos looks like. And then there's me who, even though I have ADHD, I also have anxiety. So I'm like, guys, put your backpacks here. Stop eating the phone chargers.
Oof.
Like,
Oh.
put the crumbs away. Turn off the light. And then I finally had to say to myself, like, okay, we're going to get baskets in every room. And still, even with the basket, sometimes they dump their towel right next to the laundry basket on the floor. But
Of course.
it's a ball in motion, right? So like everything is a journey. You try to manage your own anxiety, ADHD, whatever, the way that you can. And I think if your nervous system is regulated and you have trust and more cookies in the cookie jar with you and your spouse, then
For
the
sure.
little stuff doesn't bother you as much.
For sure. And then I'm able to find ways where like this kind of can work and has in the past worked in my favor and can work in my favor when I know how to use it, sort of. Like I was just thinking yesterday, I got a ton of work dumped on me yesterday. Like this guy that I'm working with on this show had his own mental health day. And he was like, guys, I can't do it. I'm logging off. I can't do it today. And which meant that we had to kind of
Pick up
jump
the
in
pieces.
and yeah, basically and on a project that needed to be done by the end of the day, of course. But being like, how do I work best? Just throw something crazy
Urgency.
at me and a bottle of water and I'm good. And I locked into a hyper focus at like 10 a.m. and plowed through everything by 5 p.m. And I was just like, nice.
Did
So
you go
that's
to
the
the
weird thing.
bathroom?
I did. Yes, I did. I've
Okay.
been trying to be better about taking breaks for actual needs instead of just getting frustrated about having any needs because that's what it has been until now. I'm like, God, why do I need to go to the bathroom again? That has been a helpful, like little, kind of finding ways that I can embrace some of these things as not even necessarily challenges, but unique gifts, I guess,
Yeah. Yeah.
for a
Yes.
world that maybe wasn't built so strictly to make them seem like challenges.
Genius. I love it. Ebbs and flows, harnessing your boundaries, harnessing when you need to jump in and your superpowers, like finding the balance of the chaos and silencing the chaos when you can. It's all beautiful. That's what I got out of this conversation. So, Christopher, thank you for sharing your journey with us. If
Of course.
someone needs a composer or would like to get in touch with you,
Yeah, they
What do you
can.
recommend? They
Well,
can.
they
Great.
can. I have a website, cmfrench.com. I'm on Instagram at cmfrench, and I don't really, my nervous system can't really handle Twitter anymore, so I'm not really on Twitter anymore. They can reach out. I have an agent at First Artist Management, but yeah, I mean, hitting me up directly is always cool, and it would be awesome to work with more neurodivergent people. I f- half the time I feel like I am, and people just don't know it. Like they maybe just don't know that about themselves. But the community that I've seen growing around you and elsewhere online of people who are not only like self-aware neurodivergence, but self-enthusiastic, maybe would be the best way to say it. Neurodivergent folks who are just like, whatever, man, this is me and I'm excited to be here. It would be awesome to have more opportunities to kind of connect with the community, no matter whether it's through work or anything else. I've been loving everything you're doing and I really appreciate it. I mean, honestly,
Thank
seriously, I
you.
got your book, remember? I have to be completely
Yes.
honest. I've gotten through
You
like a
haven't opened
quarter of
it?
it.
Oh, that's
I
good.
got through like a
Well,
quarter of it before my dopamine wore off, and it's in my uh
it's okay. It's not meant to be read in one sitting. It's a
okay.
12-step program. You know
Okay,
what
yeah,
those
right,
are.
right, right. Yeah. That's probably
But
why
it
it
has
works so
nothing
well for
to
me.
do with addiction. Yeah.
Yeah. But no, that's the thing is like it's so honestly, like I wouldn't have started thinking about this stuff and started finding ways to like relieve myself of the sort of burdensome like weight of feeling like there's something wrong with being an adult in his 40s with a kid and a family and still having some of these issues. If I hadn't seen people openly talking about this stuff on social media recently, it just wouldn't have happened. I'd still be like just trying to get through each day in a cloud of self
Aloneness. Yeah.
aloneness, isolation, and sort of self criticism. So
Yeah.
I think you're doing awesome work. And
Thank
everybody out
you.
there that listens to this and is actively like, you know, working with themselves. I don't like to say anymore working on myself. I'm working with myself. Like we're doing whatever, we're doing the work. We're doing like, I don't want to say the Lord's work, but that's the joke of it. We're doing the real work of being alive.
Things do not happen overnight. Social
For
media is such
sure.
a paradox, right? Because it can help so much, give such good information. And at the same time, sometimes we think we can just fix things overnight. And you've described in this episode how it's a lifelong condition and it ebbs and flows. But if you find your center, you find the strategies that work for you, you are aware of how your brain operates and you create your own manual, and you could thrive. It's
Mm.
not overnight.
It's not overnight though. Yeah.
It's not overnight.
Sometimes it's in the middle of the night.
Sometimes it's in the middle of the
But
night.
it's not going to be overnight, that's for sure.
When the baby wakes up.
Yeah, yeah. Or when my own thoughts wake me up. But yeah,
Yeah, exactly. So nice having you, Christopher. And go, if you're looking to get a composer, go find Christopher. Most creatives, a lot of creatives, I shouldn't say most creatives, a lot of creatives do have ADHD.
I bet.
There are stats about that. And thanks again for coming on Successful with ADHD.
Of course. Thank you for having me.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Successful with ADHD. I hope it helps you on your journey. And if you need any additional support for you or a loved one with ADHD, feel free to reach out to us at coachingwithbrooke.com and all social media platforms at Coaching with Brooke. And remember, it's Brooke with an E. Thanks again for listening. See you next time.